or drink. We're not against wine, we're not against pizza, we're not against Ben & Jerry's, we're not against chocolate. It's just how much, how frequently, and how out of control it is. So it all comes down to mindfulness and noticing when in the day we want a little something, and then asking ourselves why we want it, and then seeing if there's something else we could choose instead. And I want to turn things over to Dr. Kimberly, and I'm going to ask her a couple of questions on your guys' behalf to flush out some information for you. But please remember that you can always chat into Alex, and he will bring forth any of your questions if you don't feel like hitting the space bar and speaking on your behalf. So my first question, Dr. Kimberly, is why is sugar so addictive? Why do we crave it?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's always so helpful to have that understanding so that we know, like, why is sugar such this thing that seems to have so much power over us? And really it comes down to sugar in and of itself is a very addictive substance. And when we look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense. Back in the day when we were more hunter-gatherers, we wanted to eat the foods that had the highest caloric value. So the less hard we had to work to get the food, the better. And so sugar has a lot of calories, and it really helps us to store fuel, which from an evolutionary standpoint, again, was helpful. But now it's not. However, it still lights up those same reward pathways. So when you eat sugar, it lights up your dopamine pathway, which is all about reward. And it also sends off opioids. So think morphine, heroin, cocaine. It's lighting up those same kinds of chemicals in your body. And so you initially feel fabulous when you eat these foods. And so it's stimulating, again, that reward circuit. And when they've looked at studies, really sugar is at a comparable level with cocaine in regards to how addictive it actually is for us, but it's so much more readily available and acceptable by society. So really easy to kind of get into that trap.
Thank you. Like when I did the research for Alex's Healthy Bite on Sugar, looking historically at how, in the 1700s, we basically had honey, maple syrup, and some people could get cane sugar from the West Indies, just when slavery was allowing that to become a marketable source of high energy that went to only the aristocrats in Europe, basically. Mm-hmm. And then in the 1800s, it became more and more highly produced, and sugar became more and more on the market for the regular householder. And it was still not very much, like 18 pounds a year, not a lot when you think about it across 365 days compared to what's going on now. It just blows my mind to think that we could be eating 60 onwards up to 150 pounds of sugar per person per year. And where is all that sugar? Like, how are we getting that much sugar? Because we're certainly not putting it all in our tea and coffee.
No, and if we were, it would be so much more obvious. I mean, I think we would all agree we're not going to sit down and put that much into our coffee or add it deliberately onto our food. But the thing is, it is hidden everywhere. And whenever I do a seminar and we dive into the sugar topic, I myself even am astounded by doing the nutrition label assessments and showing others how to look and identify how much sugar is in the labels. It still shocks me how much is hidden in things. And so we're looking at things like salad dressings, barbecue sauces, ketchup, fruit juices. So those, healthy smoothie drinks can have a lot of even added sugars in them. Yogurt, anything that's fat-free. When we take out the fat, we replace it with sugar. So fat-free yogurts especially can have a lot of sugar. And one thing that's really helpful for everyone here to be able to identify how much is in the products you're eating is know that 4 grams of sugar equates to 1 teaspoon. So that helps to give you a better visual. So when you are looking at that yogurt that says it has 25 grams of sugar per cup, you know that's what is that, 6 teaspoons of sugar. And so it gives you a visual of how much is actually coming into your diet that way.
I know that we've got this neurotransmitting reward system with dopamine and morphine and other internal opiates that keep us addicted to things. But what about the emotional side? Because I know for me with my chocolate chip cookies that it is an emotional thing. I can trace it all the way back to my childhood, coming home from school. My mother stayed at home and worked way back in the 60s or 50s and 60s. And so there would be fresh baking every day that you'd come home from school and there would be like a glass of milk and a cookie or some date square or some fresh baking. And it just like daily became the go-to for me. Finish work, finish school, reward. Like it was emotional. It wasn't just the physical craving. It was like sitting back and feeling nurtured and feeling good. Can you talk a little bit about that and how we work with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a really big thing. And I think that it does feed back into, again, those chemicals that are released when we eat that. And then it becomes a feeling we crave. And so especially when there's times of stress and it's hard to get that from, you know, the lifestyle habits or relationships or things aren't feeling so much in control, that becomes an easy go-to that delivers that feeling that we're looking for. The thing with it too, though, is that dopamine response that I talked about, so that reward pathway becomes harder and harder to get that same degree of response. So we end up needing more and more of the sugar or whatever it is that's fueling that to get that same response. And so that's one of the things that can kind of feed into that addictive tendency. And then, I mean, beyond all of that brain chemical side of things, the effects of having higher levels of sugar really has a lot of impact on our hormones. So we start to see more of a more embedded pattern. It affects the gut microbiome. So the bacteria that we have in our gut changes when we have a higher sugar diet, and that all feeds into us craving it more. So we crave it more, and then it just is that source of comfort for us, definitely, Kirkland.
So it just almost becomes a catch-22. Like one cookie turns into two because first I want it emotionally from my childhood. And then secondly, all of the sugar-based bacteria in my gut biome is crying out for more sugar because it wants to outcompete the fiber-based bacteria. And so it's getting a second calling internally that's even subconscious because I actually have more bacteria inside me than I have cells.
You sure
So
do.
it has its own brain. It has its own momentum. So it's calling out inside for another cookie. So then, you know, I have my cookie at 11 and then maybe a cookie again at 4. Can we talk about timings a little bit? Why is there times in the day that there seems to be more cravings? Because I find even in the evening after dinner, like an hour or two later, I might be called to the cupboard.
Yeah, and in working with the patients, as I do, I find that can be fairly individualized. However, there's two main times that I see being really common for people to crave sugar. One is mid-afternoon. A lot of people get a low energy crash and use sugar more as a pick-me-up at that time. And then another time is evening. And that can be that same low energy pattern, but that can also be a bit of a boredom pattern coming in, that all the busyness of the day is gone and the cupboard is right there and we're watching TV and we kind of want something fun maybe to change that routine. So that timing comes into play. And so, I mean, the first piece is always figuring out for that individual what is going on, because it can be so variable. Again, with that afternoon pattern, that depletion kind of pattern, it can be a number of things. I do a lot of hormone testing in my practice, and one pattern I find quite common in people that really get that sugar craving in the afternoon is their cortisol. So their stress hormones can drop quite significantly in the afternoon, and that low cortisol, it's kind of like your reserves are crashing, and again, your body's looking for any kind of quick fuel to give you that quick pick me up. So that dehydration, again, afternoon, evening, that can be catching up with people if you haven't had enough water. And so yeah, zoning in on a few things from that angle. The other piece too is, what are you eating at your meal times? So if you are having higher glycemic breakfast, lunch, and or dinner, then you're going to be more likely to crave sugar after. And so what I mean by higher glycemic is having more kind of processed carbs, basically. So whether that's wraps and breads and white rice, buns, but having that, especially if you're not getting enough protein and healthy fats to slow that carbohydrate absorption, then you get this rapid increase in blood sugar, a strong surge of release of insulin, which is a hormone basically with the job of storing all of that sugar. And then that surge can cause this crash and then those cravings that follow. So if you are noticing sugar cravings worse at certain times, afternoon again, or evening being really common, look at maybe what you're doing that meal prior and see if you think that you're getting enough protein and fats, and maybe experiment with reducing the carbohydrate content of that meal to see if you can balance your blood sugar a bit more after that.
Does adding more fiber besides the protein and fats help too? Because I know that a lot of the good bacteria in our gut want that fiber, and then they produce the serotonin, which is another neurotransmitter in the feel-good package. Does that help counterbalance the lows as cortisol's dropping in the circadian day, getting lower in the afternoon and getting almost to nothing at nighttime when we want melatonin to get us ready for bed? So again, dinner could be more bulky with fiber, good proteins, healthy oils, and then very little carbs. And then we won't have that blood sugar spike followed by an insulin spike and then that crash you're talking about. Am I getting that right?
Yes, definitely. So fiber is really important. And so again, carbohydrates aren't the enemy. Sugar is not the enemy either. There's a lot of healthy foods that have these, carbohydrates and sugars in them. And let's say, just for sake of comparison, let's compare a banana to a chocolate bar. And in a banana, let's say we have the exact same amount of sugar. There's about 20 grams of sugar in a banana. So if we're doing kind of a smaller to mid-sized chocolate bar, we can have the same amount. Very different impact on your health and how you feel afterwards. The banana also has fiber in it. It has vitamins and minerals in it, and nothing about it is synthetic or kind of made in a factory or food plant, versus the chocolate bar often is really made in a way. There are food engineers who are designing these products to really fire those brain chemicals and to be really addictive. So we can have the same amount of sugar, totally different responses to what's coming in after. And yeah, the fiber and the nutrients and the overall composition of that plays a big role. Same when it comes to grains. And again, people, it's becoming, people are thinking about it more, I think, but we don't always think about that piece of bread turning into sugar in our bloodstream. All carbohydrates really do, but the higher fiber that they have in them. So let's say you're doing a seedy whole grain bread that has a lot higher fiber in it. It takes a lot longer for your body to break that down. So we don't get a spike, we get a slow gradual release into your system.
Thanks, Kimberly. Hey, Alex, how would you feel about putting out one of our polls and just seeing how the mountain trekkers are doing with sugar in their world? And that might bring some questions for Kimberly. And
sounds great.
In the meantime, can I ask you, Kimberly, to talk about different forms of sugar? Some of them maybe you might consider healthier than others that might be things that we know aren't healthy. Like ever since we had our first dietitian working with us when we built Mountain Trek program 20 years ago, we knew about aspartame, and it became one of the things that we've fought, intellectually forever about. We know that Europe doesn't allow aspartame in any of their soft drinks, and it took something like 17 years for the American lobby group to get the FDA to get aspartame into soft drinks for diet drinks. And it does something on the taste bud in the same area as sugar, but can you talk about some of the better ones, like maybe stevia or birch sap or whatever, all the way over to the worst ones for everyone?
Yeah, so there's so many categories when it comes to artificial sweeteners and non-artificial, so natural sweeteners that maybe are considered alternatives to sugar, and a lot of things to consider. So first, what I would say about any of those chemical sweeteners like aspartame is don't go there. A lot of evidence that one, it's not necessarily helping you from a metabolic standpoint. There are studies looking at people consuming artificial sweeteners and it actually leading to an increase in weight or body mass over time. And it's showing that you can still actually get an insulin response when you have these artificial sweeteners, which applies to any artificial sweetener really, but your body tastes that sweet taste and it anticipates glucose, that form that basically is spiking your blood sugar coming in. And when that doesn't happen, you have already had an insulin response anyways. So you're going into storage mode anyways from a metabolic standpoint. So from a artificial sweetener standpoint as a whole, I would say no to the chemical-based sweeteners like aspartame because it's more work on your liver and there's a lot of, suspicion in regards to things like cancer risk factors and things like that. And then there's a couple of categories of possibly healthier options. So that includes the sugar alcohols like xylitol and erythritol, which are usually not 100% calorie free, but they're significantly less. There so far doesn't seem to be the same kind of negative health studies as there is with things like aspartame, but I still kind of say use them sparingly. So if people have a lot of digestive issues, those specifically can cause digestive upset with that. So I'd say the jury's still out, use them sparingly. There are healthier options than things like aspartame. If I was to point my patients to better options from the artificial sweetener side of things, I would say stevia is a better option. There's also something called monk fruit, which is very similar to stevia. It tastes sweet, but it doesn't actually have sugar or calories in it. I'm still just an advocate for using those things sparingly again, because I like to keep things natural and not to confuse our body chemistry.
Yeah.
So another. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Kimberly, because even stevia, when you buy it in a package, it's a white powder, but when it's actually made, it's a brown liquid. So then there's a whole bunch of more bleaching and processing and everything in that production, which isn't in our best interest.
Yeah, definitely. And so exactly, there's a lot of processing that goes into that and manufacturing. And I think the more natural we can keep it, the better, which brings it over to the other side of things. One important thing to keep in mind or to know basically is table sugar is sucrose. So it's sucrose basically is made up of a molecule of glucose and fructose as its building blocks, and our body needs to break that down when it digests and absorbs it. Glucose is what our cells all use as fuel. Fructose, only our liver and actually our heart have receptors to be able to take that in and metabolize it. Fine, when we're looking at eating, fruit and all of these natural foods, there is fructose in it and it's not a big concern. However, what we've done as humans again is we've come in and we have started to make things like high fructose corn syrup. And so fructose, when it's in high quantities like that, poses way more health risks than table sugar, than things like maple syrup. And so those are other things to watch for on ingredient labels. So you definitely want to be avoiding things like high fructose corn syrup. It's way more implicated in things like hypertension, cardiovascular disease, liver disease, kidney disease than any other sugar. And so when it comes to choosing what form you use for natural sugars, that's something that I really keep in mind for people too. So for example, just cane sugar is sucrose, so it's got the blend. That's actually a good thing. Maple syrup is mostly sucrose. Honey has a little bit more fructose, but it's still in a balance that I'm comfortable with. Agave nectar, on the other hand, it became really popular in the health world for a while, but it is almost all fructose. So that is one natural sweetener that I would not suggest. And then things like molasses are actually a really healthy option when it comes to sugars because there's a lot of minerals and nutrients in that as well. So I like to keep it simple at the end of the day, because if we give too much information and make it too confusing, it's impossible to take any action with anything. And so generally, if you're going to remember one thing, it's the more you are having forms of sugar that you can clearly tell where it came from. So, you know, having some maple syrup, having some honey, adding these things in minimally, and mostly getting your sugars in through fruits and natural sources. That's the recipe for success. And just steer clear of anything that we're making in labs and factories and that have any kind of engineering going on behind them.
Thanks, Dr. Kimberly. Alex,
Thanks,
poll,
Kimberly.
it looked like chocolate was the winner.
Yeah, chocolate, afternoon, after dinner. I'm right there with everyone. I showed Kirk and Kimberly, I have a chocolate wrapper in my trash right now. But I completed my no sugar added challenge first, and then I had a reward of some dark chocolate, which has surprisingly low amounts of sugar, but has caffeine. So balance it out.
Alex, do you still have that handy to show them what you're eating?
Yeah,
because that's what Alex is having.
If there's a weaning process, like if we're, say, doing chocolate bar that's mostly milk chocolate, like 35%, that's really higher in sugar, isn't it? But if we get down to where Alex is, Alex, what percentage of chocolate is yours?
This is 95, and I've worked my palate up, and I have an interesting story about 99% chocolate, which I'll save for you guys when you see me at the retreat. But this, if I look at the label, it only has let's see, 32 grams. This is 80 grams. So let's say it's just over a third of the bar. It has 1 gram of sugar. So I think a can of Coke has something like 26 or 30 grams of sugar. So I'd have to eat 15 bars to equal 1 can of Coke. So all things considered, it's lower on sugar.
One of the things that we hold our tenets with Jen, our nutritionist, is if you're going to have a little something for that sweet taste bud in night, again, meal timings is so important, and food intakes of timings is important. We suggest putting it in with dinner. So if you have dinner and you think of your stomach as a big container in a laboratory, and you've got the oils and the proteins and the fiber vegetables, and you've got some complex carbs, and that's all going to the laboratory of digestion. If we have a little piece of chocolate or a tiny little bit of something with dinner, it just goes into that laboratory, gets swirled all around, and then as it moves through the digestive system, it kind of equalizes in terms of not getting a blood sugar spike followed by an insulin spike. And so, you know, if you want to have something sweet and you're thinking about timings of it, if you have it with a meal, it's better than by itself. Would you agree, Kimberly?
Yes, yep, I definitely would. I think that that's a good strategy. And yeah, again, I think the mindfulness around, I mean, I'm very not proud of Alex, but kudos to Alex for having the 95%, because there's very little sweet in it. It's actually more on the bitter side than anything, but you can definitely work up to that, as he has done. And if you are,
my tricks on dark chocolate is ease yourself into it. Start with 70% and then go to 80, 85, 90. And a lot of people freeze their chocolate. Don't do that, because it just so hard for the flavor to come out. I actually eat a lot of chocolate with tea, because the hot tea melts the chocolate, and it honestly, a 95% chocolate bar, when it's warmed up and with some tea, it tastes like a 70% chocolate bar.
That is a delicious trick. I love it.
Kimberly, I was wondering if there was anything besides the meal that you're talking about before the evening, or the last meal of the day, the dinner and the components of the meal that would help with the cravings for sugar, with blood sugar spiking and collapsing. Would you have any other supplements, for example, any herbs, any teas like Alex is talking about, anything that would help with that evening or afternoon sugar kind of craving period?
Yeah, again, I'm so individualized with people that are really, I like to focus in on what specifically the cause is, but there are a few things from a general standpoint that can be really helpful. So if we're just trying to give you the sweet taste, One thing that a lot of people like is licorice tea. A lot of people also really don't like it, so it depends on if you like that flavor or not. But that can be helpful. Usually I find that a helpful tool for people in the afternoon because licorice can actually increase cortisol a bit. You definitely don't want to be having licorice if you have high blood pressure. Or a high kind of cortisol pattern if we've looked at that and tested it. However, in that classic pattern where your energy is crashing in the afternoon, it can be a really helpful tool to bring in. I do a lot of testing for insulin resistance in my practice. So a lot of people with perfectly normal blood sugar do not realize that they have high levels of insulin already. And it's not something that's tested for as often as I wish it was conventionally. So when I see that kind of picture for people, there's supplements that I'd be using to try and reset that insulin sensitivity. And so there's certain minerals like chromium or lipoic acid, which is more of an antioxidant, that can be really helpful in resetting that. Again, with the sugar cravings, I focus a lot often on the adrenal glands and the stress response. So helping to balance that out. And so that does become individualized, but that can look at herbs. Like there's various ginsengs that can be really helpful as well to boost that up. One trick I've used with fairly good success with a lot of patients too who are really struggling with the sugar craving is there is an amino acid called L-Glutamine, and it's really helpful for healing the gut. So I do a lot of work with food sensitivities with patients as well, and when this is a prominent picture, I use a lot of that, but we can have people swish it around in their mouth, and it seems to bind to the sweet taste receptors and oddly satisfy them. It's not that it tastes sweet really itself, but swishing it around in their mouth before they swallow it as part of their dosing is something that I've had odd success with.
Where would you get something like that, Dr. Kimberly?
Most health food stores would sell L-Glutamine, and it's generally a safe supplement for people to take unless they, some people have trouble breaking down glutamine. I've only had a handful of patients who have had this kind of concern. So if you know you really don't tolerate MSG, it might not be the best option for you. However, it is totally different than MSG. So it's not that you're taking MSG, but most health food stores would have that. It's something that I use a lot for people also who are doing heavier workouts and looking for something that's going to help with muscle recovery because it definitely helps with that muscle recovery post-workout in addition to things from a gut health standpoint.
So in that instance, do you mix it in something? And then the prior instance, you said you swish it around. Is that a dropper or something like that?
Yeah, so it's a powder. You can get it as a capsule, but in this case, you want it as a powder. And then you don't need very much. Like if I'm doing a full dose for kind of more of a gut healing or athletic performance protocol, I'm doing about a 5-gram dose. But for this purpose, you need maybe one gram. You're putting it in a little bit of water and you're just swishing it around your mouth, kind of gargling it, and then swallowing it. So.
So the next time a bad sugar craving hits, you can try that and see what happens.
Yeah.
I don't know about that or chocolate chip cookie. That's a tough one.
Yeah. And so really, again, it's so much about moderation, right? And I am personally somebody who used to be a complete sugaraholic, cookie monster, like anything sugar, give it to me. And this is before I kind of went through the naturopathic schooling protocol and did a lot of work on balancing my gut, balancing my hormones. And I see this for a lot of people, not everybody. So it's in those people more that are really struggling with sugar cravings that, we might be needing to bring in some of these strategies. Whereas if you feel like you have a pretty good handle on your sugar craving, we might not be needing to bring in these kind of tools. And it might be just about having a glass of water. You might actually be thirsty. So
I noticed that in the afternoon where I feel like I'm hungry and, I have a glass of water and then I feel like my eyes get bigger. Everything seems a bit more alive. My energy level goes up and I realized there was a bit of dehydration.
Totally. And sometimes like in the evening, I'm not anti-dessert. I do have dessert, not all the time. But I think
share your chocolate peanut butter, no dairy, no added sugar milkshake in Monday's newsletter. And
Yes.
I tell you what, I was salivating just reading the email.
It is so good, and there is no added sugar. So I do in that what I carry at home or I use at home for protein powder. It is sweetened with stevia, so there's some sweetener in it, but it's minimal. But there's no added sugars. There's the banana in there to sweeten it up, and then the cacao powder. So there's things like that you can do. It tastes like a full-on chocolate milkshake. So if you didn't check out the link, it is in the blog that Alex sent. I have meal plan programs, and it's not about deprivation. I am making, have recipes for people to have desserts, but we're using a little bit of maple syrup and making, chocolate truffle balls and things like that are actually really satisfying. And when you retrain your taste buds, which is an important point, that even if you are really strongly craving sugar right now, and you totally feel like that Cookie Monster, it doesn't take long to change things. And as we reset the hormones and we reset your taste buds, so if you have been doing this sugar-free challenge, you might have already noticed that, but your cravings start to change and you actually start to notice how much sugar is actually in things. And if we can give you the satisfaction and kind of that feel good through a method of delivery that is not spiking your insulin to that same degree, then we can get off that roller coaster of feeling that addiction and that constant need. So next time anyone has like a Reese's peanut butter cup or O. Henry bar or any of those kind of more conventional chocolate bars, pay attention to how you feel afterwards. Do you feel satisfied, or do you feel like that was all just lit up? The last experiment I did, it was crazy.
That like immediately after, or how long? Because I tell you what, right, immediately it feels great. But are you talking 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 hours?
Both. So, I mean, I think the best experiment for people is when Halloween is coming just around the corner and you get those boxes where you have all of these little mini chocolate bars. And I don't know who here can have just one or two and feel satisfied. If I'm having that kind of dessert, it is like, I want one after another after another. I don't get that shut off switch where it feels like, oh, you know what? I felt like I got what I needed from that. I feel good now. It's like it lights something up, but at least for me, it does not turn off. Versus if we are doing kind of more of the whole foods, real ingredients, you've got like protein and fat. So maybe we're also using nuts and seeds along with some of the honey or maple syrup, and we're keeping those ingredients to more of a minimum. It's a lot more satisfying. So that's kind of the concept behind the few of the things that I do. It's not that there's no desserts, but it's paying attention to how you feel after different types and moving away from that more synthetic driven piece of it by the food industry driven, all of the food experiment science that we want to get away from.
Yeah, I totally concur with you, Kimberly, that it still comes down to mindfulness. If we want to check into our cravings or obsessions or our habits or addictions, we have to take a pause for a moment and just ask before we go even and take that first bite, is this really what I need? Mm-hmm. And if we just take that little break and go, well, no, maybe I just need a glass of water, or maybe I'm bored and I need to do something different, or it could be boredom, it could be loneliness, it could be energy drop, it could be so many different things, rather than just thinking this little thing or this scoop of something or this drink is going to make me feel better. Then mm-hmm. we can start to break a habit, because otherwise the dopamine link to the neurotransmitter habits that we have from reaching, eating, biting, swallowing, it'll just be automatic. Mm-hmm. And so I think that question is really important. That pause.
Kirk, we talk a lot about triggers, and it's something that needs to happen to trigger those questions that you were mentioning.
Yes.
I think it's a good idea it takes practice, but to actually have that first bite be the trigger. So that first bite that you have of the Reese's peanut butter cups or Henry bar be the trigger that has you then follow through with those questions of, is this what I need right now? Before you even, because it's too hard to try and have those questions before you have the chocolate bar.
It's pretty hard to only have one bite of something that's a trigger, because already the dopamine's calling for more dopamine. So that's why in most habit breaking research, the trigger is considered a feeling or a thought. So and it doesn't matter whether it's tobacco or alcohol or sugar or any number of the compulsions that we all have to feel better. If we have a feeling or a thought that's arising that makes us feel uncomfortable, and we have a habit of certain things making us feeling more comfortable, that behavior after the trigger is to get the substance that makes us feel more comfortable. So it doesn't matter whether it's sugar or anything else. So the question before, when the feeling or thought arises, or at the door of the fridge or the cupboard, or grabbing the cork off the wine bottle or whatever, we then ask, and we might still go forward and go and have it, but at least we're doing it mindfully. We might still have that cookie or chocolate or a glass of wine, and that's okay. But it's just when we do these things from a habitual way that we can get ourselves in trouble. Then it's out of control. It's totally run on neuro patterns, basically.
That's when you get like 3 chocolate bars in before you even realize what.
Yeah, like the Halloween chocolate bar scene, for sure. Mm-hmm. I think we've got time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Did anything come in on the chat, Alex?
Yeah, we've got a great question about the connection between gut health and diabetes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's actually some links in with that, with the artificial sweeteners. So when they've been looking, they've mostly seen it in animal studies so far, but having artificial sweeteners can significantly change the gut microbiome, so the bacteria in your gut, in a way that actually raises your blood sugar, even if you're not having more blood sugar. So they're investigating now to see if they're seeing that same link in humans. But I mean, gut health from a lot of different ways can be linked through to diabetes and blood sugar. I would say the primary emphasis in my practice with anyone is looking at gut health, because it is where the vast majority of your immune reactions are taking place. It's where you're digesting and absorbing your food. So there is definitely research in regards to the bacteria side of things, but I look so much with people into helping them personalize their diet, really paying attention to the kinds of food that you're eating, the fiber content, all of that as a main link. So yes, it's very linked, but I kind of drill down and personalize it from there. I do a lot of work with food sensitivities, which has a lot of links to type 1 diabetes more than type 2. But yeah, I don't know if that's specific enough for what that individual was hoping for an answer, but.
Great. So I have to end with some public service announcements, just due diligence. First, Dr. Kimberly offers her services remotely. So if you guys are interested in doing any tests about your gut health, and she has a whole list of things, email me, just send your email in the message, and she has a packet that's specifically designed for Mountain Trek guests and alumni that I can send over to you, and so she can support you on that. And then second thing is, if you do want to take a weekend away from sugar and you do want to spend a weekend living the Mountain Trek principles, we are starting to do what we call base camp retreats, which are virtual, very similar to this. And our staff, Kirk, myself, our kinesiologist, Christy, our yoga instructor, Kyla, our chef, Jillian, we lead you virtually through an entire weekend that lives by the Mountain Trek principles. So you'll be eating the right foods at the right time. You'll be moving your body in the right ways at the right time. And effectively, after one weekend spent with us, you'll emerge feeling lighter, happier, healthier. So those are my public service announcements. We do have one of those weekends coming up this Saturday. It is Eastern and Central time. We have a couple spots left, and we would love to see you guys there.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Also, I just wanted to mention too, I'm available for half-hour free check-in chat on your health, helping you get optimal health in any of the pillars, from exercise to nutrition, to stress management, sleep hygiene, any area that you wanted to talk about, that you can just sign up also for that into a calendar that I'm available in. So It was great to have you all here joining us tonight. And I want to give a big hand to Dr. Kimberly for coming out and helping us with some great information about how to manage sugar, one of the most addictive substances on the planet. And it's so prevalent in our culture and society right now. Thank you so much, Dr. Kimberly.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, it was really great to be on. And if anyone's looking, I've got a blog with free recipes and tons of resources. So healthyliferedesign.com, which is where you'll find that milkshake that Alex had talked about as well. So yes, thank you. Always enjoy being part of the Mountain Trek calls. It was really fabulous.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
See you in 2 weeks again for our next healthy, happy hour. If you want to join us again in 2 weeks, we'll have another interesting topic for you.
Perfect. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay healthy and happy.
You too.